The engine bay of the naval training facility hums like a living creature, steel ribs stretching overhead, fluorescent lights buzzing softly against the distant roar of running turbines. It smells of oil, hot metal, and 100 stories no one has ever bothered to write down. Henry Cole stands in the middle of it all, like he's grown from the floor. Dark blue coveralls, cap pulled low, sleeves rolled just enough to show forearms mapped with old scars. Around his neck hangs a mechanic's stethoscope, its brass bell polished from decades of use. His hands are steady, stained by time and work, not by ink or signatures. To the fresh recruits watching from the doorway, he looks ordinary. Seriously? One of them mutters, trying and failing to keep it quiet. The voice belongs to Ensign Tyler March, 24, sharp jaw, sharper tongue. His white uniform is spotless, collar stiff, ribbons straight. To him, the world is a ladder. You climb, or you get climbed over. Beside him, Ensign Blake shifts uncomfortably. Careful, Tyler. They said he's a veteran. A veteran of what? Carburetors? Tyler scoffs. We're supposed to learn about a state-of-the-art hybrid drive, and they bring in someone's grandfather with a stethoscope. Blake glances at the man by the engine, then at the others gathering behind them. A few smirk, a few pretend not to hear. One or two look uneasy, but no one steps in. It's easier to ride the current than swim against it. Henry doesn't react. If he hears them, it doesn't show. He's focused on the machine in front of him, on the steady rhythm of power, thrumming through steel pipes and polished housings. The engine is new, all sharp edges and shining chrome, but that doesn't matter. New machines behave just like old ones once you learn to listen. He presses the stethoscope's bell against a section of tubing and closes his eyes. Tap, tap, tap. Not sound, feel. The faintest variations, like a heartbeat that's one note off. To anyone else, it would be nothing. To him, it's a syllable in a language he's spent a lifetime learning. The training officer clears his throat. All personnel present? Yes, sir, Blake answers automatically. Tyler doesn't bother responding. His gaze is locked on the old mechanic. This, the officer announces, gesturing toward Henry, is Mr. Henry Cole. 32 years of service with naval engineering. If there's someone who can teach you what keeps your ship alive, it's him. Tyler's eyebrows shoot up. With respect, sir, I thought we'd be hearing from one of the design engineers. Someone who understands the software. The architecture. Without looking away from the engine, Henry speaks for the first time. Software doesn't keep you afloat when a valve seizes at sea, son. The words are calm. Not angry, not sharp. Calm in the way of someone who has argued with hurricanes and outlived them. A couple of recruits chuckle under their breath. Tyler stiffens. With respect, he echoes, the phrase now sounding like a challenge. Times have changed. We have diagnostics for that. Error codes, predictive maintenance. We're not in the Stone Age anymore. Henry lifts the stethoscope, letting it dangle from his fingers. His gaze settles on Tyler, and for a second, the room feels smaller. You're right, he says softly. You've got gadgets now, screens, alerts, all of them screaming at you when something's already gone wrong. He taps the side of his head. What you don't have is this yet. Not trained, not tuned, not until something scares you enough to start listening. The training officer shifts, as if he'd like to step in, but isn't sure how much rope to give his star recruit. Mr. Cole, he says, we'd appreciate a demonstration of what you were telling me about earlier. Henry nods once, then looks back at the engine. The recruits follow his gaze. It's a beast, part diesel, part electric drive. Part classified magic they're not supposed to ask about. It's been signed off, tested, cleared by every department. Officially, there is nothing wrong with it. Unofficially, the hairs on the back of Henry's neck have been standing up since he walked in. He rests the stethoscope against a junction where two polished pipes meet. For a moment, he closes his eyes again. The engine's vibration flows through his fingers, through the thin tubing of the stethoscope, into the bones of his skull. There it is again. Not a noise anyone else would call a problem. Just a faint echo, a hollow spot in the rhythm, like breath hitching before a cough. He straightens. Who ran the last diagnostic on this? He asks. Blake checks the tablet in his hand. That would be Ensign March, sir. Yesterday afternoon. All eyes shift to Tyler. Henry gives him a small, almost courteous smile. You ran it yourself? Tyler lifts his chin. Yes, I did. System shows all clear. Henry turns back to the engine. And when the system tells you something's wrong, what do you do? Fix it, Tyler replies quickly. And when the system tells you everything's fine, Henry continues, you stop thinking? A few recruits shift uncomfortably. The question hangs in the air like a weight. Tyler's jaw flexes. I trust the data, sir. That's what we're trained to do. Henry nods slowly, as if he expected that answer. Step closer, he says. Bring your data with you. The officer gestures for Tyler to do as he's told. The young ensign walks to Henry's side, tablet in hand, expression tight. Henry presses the stethoscope back to the pipe. Here, he says quietly, handing Tyler the earbuds. Listen. Tyler hesitates. The stethoscope looks almost ridiculous against all the shining technology around them. But there are too many eyes on him now. He slips the buds into his ears. Now, Henry says, tell me what you hear. At first, Tyler hears nothing but a steady hum, the engine's pulse. A low, constant thrum, like a giant cat purring. It matches the numbers on his screen, all within tolerance. It's fine, he starts to say. Listen longer, Henry murmurs. Tyler frowns, focusing despite himself. Beneath the hum, there's a faint ticking. Barely there, like a distant drip in a noisy room. Once he notices it, he can't unhear it. Tick, tick, tick. What is that? He asks, more to himself than anyone. Henry's eyes sharpen. Now try this. He reaches past Tyler and taps a control to increase the engine's RPM by a fraction. Small enough that no red flags pop up on the tablet. The hum grows a shade louder. The ticking does too. Tick, 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 tick. It's still subtle, but it's faster now. More insistent, like something rattling against a door from the other side. Tyler pulls the stethoscope away. That's just resonance, right? He says, forcing a shrug. Heat expansion, maybe. Henry's voice stays calm, but loses none of its weight. That's a feed valve starting to chatter under strain. He points to a small, almost hidden line feeding into the junction. Right now, it's a sound. In 3 weeks at sea, under heavy load, that sound becomes a crack, then a rupture, then a fire that crawls faster than any of you can run. A ripple of unease runs through the group. The officer steps forward. The diagnostics would have flagged that, he insists. Wouldn't they? Henry doesn't look at him. His gaze never leaves the engine. Not yet, he says. Your system sees the world in green and red, on and off, safe and unsafe. He taps the metal lightly with his knuckles. Engines don't live in green and red. They live in the gray in between. Tyler checks his tablet more frantically now, scrolling through the logs, hunting for some line that proves the old man wrong. The numbers still look fine, The charts still show smooth curves. But his ears won't forget that ticking. Henry turns to face the room at last. You were right about one thing, Ensign, he says. Times have changed. You've got tools I never dreamed of when I was your age. He lifts the stethoscope a little. But this isn't nostalgia. It's not a joke. It's a promise. A promise to who? Someone asks from the back. Henry's gaze hardens. And for the first time, they see something in his eyes that isn't tired patience. To the people standing on the deck above this engine when the ocean decides to test your work, he says quietly. To every sailor who goes to sleep trusting that what you signed off will not betray them in the dark. The room falls silent. Tyler looks away, throat tight. He suddenly remembers the signature he put on yesterday's inspection. The casual way he'd done it. Thinking of dinner. Messages. A night out. He imagines a ship at sea, storm overhead, and that faint ticking, turning into something worse. Henry takes a step back from the engine. Today, he says, you get to hear the warning whisper. Tomorrow, if you're careless, you'll only hear the scream. He rests the stethoscope against his chest for a moment, as if feeling his own heartbeat answer. Class isn't about learning how to press buttons, he finishes. It's about learning how to listen before it's too late. No one laughs now. No one smirks. For the first time since they walked in, the young officers look at the old mechanic, not as an inconvenience, not as a relic, but as the only thing standing between their overconfidence and someone else's nightmare. Up above, unseen through steel and rivets, the wind brushes gently against the hull of a ship that hasn't sailed yet. And somewhere deep inside the machinery, a faint ticking waits to see what they'll do next. For several long seconds after Henry Cole finished speaking, the engine bay stayed frozen in absolute silence. The recruits stood there, not breathing, not shifting, as if afraid that any movement might make that faint ticking echo louder. Tyler March swallowed hard, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him. Just minutes ago, he'd been the loudest voice in the room, confident, sarcastic, certain he knew more than the man in coveralls. Now his confidence felt thin, brittle, like that valve Henry warned them about. The training officer tapped the tablet in his hand, brow furrowed in visible discomfort. Mr. Cole, he said cautiously, are you certain it's not just thermal flex? It's a brand new assembly. Factory tests cleared everything. Henry didn't turn around. He was still looking at the engine, as if it were an old friend he was reluctant to leave unattended. Brand new, he murmured. That's the problem. The officer blinked. How's that a problem? Henry sighed. Slow, heavy. New parts misbehave the worst, he said. They don't know their place yet. A couple recruits exchanged confused looks. Blake hesitated before speaking. Sir, machines know their place. What does that mean? Henry turned toward them, brows raised. You ever meet a rookie sailor who thinks they know everything? He asked. Several recruits automatically looked at Tyler. Henry's mouth twitched in a faint, knowing smile. Engines are the same. New parts haven't settled, haven't stretched under real pressure. They haven't learned how they're supposed to carry the load. He tapped the side of the pipe gently. Right now, this valve is whispering that it's uncomfortable, that it's straining to pretend everything's fine. That whisper becomes a shout once you hit rough seas. Tyler's ears burned. Several recruits glanced at him again. The training officer cleared his throat sharply, redirecting attention. Mr. Cole, would you mind explaining how you can be certain? Our brief says this drive is the most stable model built. Henry finally stepped away from the engine. He lifted the stethoscope and twirled it lightly between his fingers, the metal gleaming under the lights. Because, he said simply, I've heard this sound before. He walked toward a metal workbench and set the stethoscope down gently, almost reverently. 40 years ago, I was on a destroyer in the North Atlantic, he began. Brand new ship, brand new drive, brand new everything. The room went utterly still. In our second week out, the diagnostics all showed green, every screen smiling at us. But at night, when the engines quieted down, there was this small hitch, a hollow beat. Barely something you'd notice. His fingers drummed the workbench slowly. A rhythm. A memory. A warning. We ignored it for a day, Henry continued. Then two. On the third night, that hollow beat split into four. He paused. On the fourth night, it nearly killed 27 sailors. A chill ran through the room. Even the machinery felt quieter. Tyler's heart hammered. Killed? How? Henry looked up, and something in his eyes was older than his wrinkles. Older than grease stains on his sleeves. Older than the Navy itself. When that valve failed, the fuel injection line ruptured. It sprayed a stream of atomized fuel into a compartment hot enough to ignite it in an instant. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. The sound cracked through the air. We had fire crawling along the ceiling like a living thing. Men ran blind through smoke so thick it felt like pushing through water. No one moved. No one blinked. Henry continued quietly. We saved the ship, but the man standing next to me didn't get to walk out of that room. And when I told the board afterward that the engine was whispering at us, they told me I imagined it. He picked up the stethoscope again, holding it like a relic. 3 years later, the Navy made this standard issue for me, because I was right, and because men died before anyone believed my ears. The recruits looked at the tool differently now, like it was a weapon, or a shield. Tyler felt the back of his throat tighten. His earlier confidence now felt petty, childish. Henry stepped closer to him, not aggressive, not triumphant, but steady and calm. You did nothing wrong yesterday, Henry said. You did what every young officer does. You trusted the machine more than yourself, but you can't lead a crew until you understand one thing. Tyler lifted his eyes. Henry tapped his own chest. You're responsible for their lives, not the diagnostics. Tyler swallowed, voice barely audible. How do I learn to hear it? Henry placed the stethoscope into Tyler's shaking hands. Start by listening when there isn't an emergency, Henry said gently. Listening when you think you already know the answer. Listening even when the machine says everything's fine. Tyler held the stethoscope like it weighed 20 pounds. It wasn't shame he felt. It was fear. Fear of the responsibility he hadn't realized came with the uniform on his back. Blake stepped forward slowly. Mr. Cole, does that sound mean we need to shut it down immediately? Henry shook his head. No. Not yet. It's early. If I show you what to tune, your diagnostics will flag it properly next time. But first... He turned toward the group of recruits once more, eyes scanning each of them. Who here thinks they can hear better than a computer? Awkward silence. Then, hesitantly, Blake raised a hand halfway. I want to try. Good, Henry said, nodding. Because the ocean doesn't care how perfect you think your software is. When a ship is screaming, you answer. When she whispers, he pointed to the engine, you listen harder. The training officer looked around the room and saw something he hadn't seen before. The recruits weren't just watching Henry. They were absorbing him, fearing him, needing him. Tyler glanced at the others, then took a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Mr. Cole?" he asked quietly. Henry raised a brow. Tyler swallowed hard. "If you'd teach me, I want to hear it too." Henry's expression didn't soften. It deepened. "That's the first real thing you've said today." Tyler nodded slowly, gripping the stethoscope. Henry turned toward the engine once more. "Class isn't over," he said. "It's just getting started." The recruits stepped closer, forming a half circle around the engine. The hum filled their ears, steady, alive, full of secrets waiting to be heard. And in the center of them all, Henry Cole pressed his palm against the machine like he was greeting an old friend. "Now listen," he said softly. And for the first time, they did. For the next several minutes, the engine bay held an unusual kind of silence. The fragile, trembling silence of young officers realizing the world is larger, harsher, and more alive than they ever imagined. Henry Cole watched them settle into place. Tyler gripping the stethoscope like it was sacred. Blake standing close enough to see, but not close enough to interrupt. And the remaining recruits forming a cautious semicircle around the hybrid engine. The training officer stepped back, letting Henry lead without question. A veteran's authority didn't come from rank. It came from scars. "All right," Henry said, voice low but firm, "one at a time." He motioned to Tyler. "Since you did the last inspection, you're up first." Tyler exhaled slowly, wiped his palms on his uniform, and stepped closer to the machine. He pressed the stethoscope carefully where Henry had earlier, right at the junction of the two polished pipes. The engine's steady hum vibrated through his fingers. He frowned. He listened harder. Tick. Tick. It came and went like a flicker. One moment almost non-existent, the next sharp enough to feel in his teeth. "I hear it," Tyler whispered, eyes widening. "It's faint, but it's there." Henry nodded. "You hear it because now you're listening for it." Tyler lowered the stethoscope and stared at Henry with something that looked uncomfortably like respect. Before he could speak, a metallic clank echoed from somewhere, deep inside the drive system. Half the recruits flinched. Blake took a startled step back. Henry didn't move. Didn't even blink. "That's your second warning," he murmured. Tyler paled. "Second." "What was the first?" Henry tapped the pipe gently. "That whispering valve. It's starting to argue now." The engine bay suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. More dangerous. The training officer frowned, confused. "Mr. Cole, the readings still show nominal. Nothing's out of threshold." Henry turned slowly. "Machines don't follow your thresholds, Lieutenant." Then he pointed toward the diagnostic screen on the wall. "It's barely running at half output." Henry didn't answer right away. He knelt beside the housing, pressed a palm to the base, and closed his eyes for a second. "Because she's been idling too long," he finally said. "Engines that were built to move don't like being still. Pressure builds in the wrong places. Heat settles where it shouldn't." His voice softened. "And this one has something else going on." Hannah, quiet, observant Hannah, finally spoke up. "Something like what?" Henry raised his head slowly. "Vibration irregularity." Tyler blinked. "Meaning?" Henry pointed upward. "Something above us is pulling more power than it should." The recruits exchanged startled glances. The training officer stiffened. "That can't be right. This bay is isolated from upper deck fluctuations." Henry stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Machines don't lie," he said simply. "People do." That statement hit the room like a shockwave. The recruits' expressions changed, fear mixing with curiosity, confusion mixing with adrenaline. Blake swallowed hard. "Sir, are you saying someone's tampering with the ship?" Henry didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the wall-mounted fuse panel near the back of the bay. It was locked, sealed, untouched, or so it seemed. He placed his palm against the metal door. The faint hum changed instantly, an irregular pulse radiating through the skin of the ship. He stepped back. The training officer hurried forward. But this is a restricted panel. Only engineering staff has access. Henry pointed at the lower hinge. Then why is the paint scuffed? Everyone leaned in. Sure enough, tiny scratches lined the metal, barely visible, but unmistakable to trained eyes. Someone had opened it, recently. Blake whispered, horrified, "Who would break into a live power relay? That's suicide." Henry didn't respond. He was already reaching for his tools. Tyler stepped forward suddenly. "Sir, wait. Shouldn't we call security? This could be dangerous." 1. Henry's voice was calm. "If there's danger in that box, it's better I open it than someone who doesn't know what they're doing." 2. Tyler hesitated, then nodded. 2. Henry unlocked the panel with a small steel key he always kept tucked behind his badge. The moment he opened it, every recruit froze. Inside the panel, amid perfectly arranged wires and factory-clean components, sat a small black device, a foreign object, definitely not Navy-issued. And it wasn't passive. A faint red light blinked on its surface. Blake gasped. "Is that?" Tyler finished the thought in a trembling voice. "A sabotage node." The training officer's face went white. "That shouldn't even be possible. There are security checks, access logs." Henry cut him off sharply. Somebody bypassed them. He reached out, gently removing the device from its hidden nest of wires. The red light on it blinked faster. The recruits stepped back instantly. Tyler's voice cracked. "Sir, please tell me that isn't explosive." Henry shook his head. "No, if it were explosive, it wouldn't blink." He held it up between his fingers. "This is worse." The training officer whispered, "What is it?" Henry's voice turned cold. "It's a pulse disruptor, a time signal scrambler. It feeds false data into the drive diagnostics and masks stress signatures." Blake's mouth fell open. "So the engine's been in trouble this whole time, and the system didn't warn us?" Henry nodded. "Because someone didn't want it to." Tyler stepped closer, adrenaline surging through him. "Sir, who would plant something like this?" Henry looked at the recruits, quiet, still, scared. Then he looked at the engine, the humming steel giant trying its best to keep itself together. He exhaled. "I don't know who." He held up the device. "But I know they're not finished." And then the entire bay shook. A sudden, violent tremor rattled the walls, knocking a wrench off a shelf, sending a box of bolts tumbling across the floor. Alarms blared overhead. Lights flickered. Henry spun toward the engine. "Everyone out, now!" But the recruits didn't run. They froze, eyes wide, fear holding them like steel clamps. Henry barked, louder, "Move!" The training officer shoved the first recruit toward the exit. Tyler grabbed Hannah's arm. "Go, go!" As the recruits sprinted for the door, Henry turned back toward the engine, his instincts screaming at him. The sabotage wasn't just masking a problem, it had given birth to one. Behind him, Tyler shouted, "Mr. Cole, come on!" But Henry didn't move. He stared at the machine, listening, feeling, hearing something deeper than before. The tick was gone. What replaced it was worse. A long, low, growling vibration. A threat. Henry whispered under his breath, "Something's waking up." The trembling didn't stop. If anything, it worsened. Subtle at first. just enough to rattle the tools on the nearest workbench. But then it deepened into a violent, metallic shiver that crawled along the bay floor and up the walls like a living pulse. Henry Cole felt it through his boots before he heard it. A deep, dragging groan hummed through the engine, not the whisper of a troubled valve, not the hiccup of thermal stress, but the unmistakable sound of strain turning into failure. Behind him, the recruits were bottlenecked at the exit, panic turning their movements into clumsy collisions. "Keep moving," the training officer shouted, half pushing Blake through the door. But Henry didn't turn away. He stepped closer to the engine instead, eyes narrowing, ears straining for clarity. Something was off, very off, and it wasn't just the device in his hand. "Tyler," Henry barked without looking back, "get the others outside." Tyler froze at the doorway, chest heaving, torn between listening to Henry and running like every instinct in his body begged him to. "Sir," Tyler called out, voice thin with fear, "we have to evacuate. The alarms. Now, son." The command hit him like a slap. Tyler grabbed Hannah by the elbow and pulled her into the hallway, just as the bay lights flickered again. Bright white, then dim orange, then frantic strobing. Henry's gaze shifted to the panel behind him. The wires were still humming, still feeding power, still alive. But the engine? He pressed a palm to the housing. It felt hot. Too hot. He lowered into a crouch, fingers brushing the bolts along the frame. The metal hummed against his skin, a vibration that wasn't constant, but pulsing irregularly, like a heartbeat with an arrhythmia. Something deeper was wrong. The training officer snapped from the doorway. "Mr. Cole, please. We need to seal this room before the system isolates the fault." Henry stood slowly. "No," he said flatly. "You seal this room now, and you kill the ship." The recruits stared at him from the hallway. Tyler, gripping the doorframe, eyes wide and terrified. "What does that mean?" Blake shouted. Henry pointed toward the main drive column, which was now shaking hard enough to rattle its support braces. "That vibration isn't coming from the valve anymore," Henry said. He took one slow step forward. "It's coming from the shaft." The training officer's jaw dropped. "That's impossible. The shaft is offline." "No," Henry growled. "It thinks it's offline." He lifted the sabotage device. This piece of garbage didn't just mask diagnostics, it rerouted them. "You've been feeding wrong data into the system since startup." A chorus of fearful murmurs rose among the recruits. Hannah swallowed hard. "So the ship doesn't know it's hurting?" Henry nodded grimly. "And now it's telling us the only way it knows how." The deck lurched again, this time so violently that the overhead lights swung like pendulums. A toolbox crashed from a shelf and clattered across the floor, scattering wrenches like thrown bones. The recruits flinched. Tyler yelled into the bay. "Cole, let us help you!" Henry didn't answer. He walked straight toward the trembling drive column, one hand bracing against a rail, the other gripping the sabotage device. The training officer shouted after him, "What are you doing? Henry, get out of there!" But Henry didn't slow. He reached the shaft housing and crouched again, pressing his ear to the metal, not with a stethoscope, but his bare skin. For a moment, the world fell away. No alarms, no shouting recruits, no flashing lights, just the sound of steel in pain. The vibration wasn't random. It had rhythm, broken rhythm, a sick pattern. Henry closed his eyes. Someone realigned the pressure distribution, he muttered to himself. Shifted torque into the lower assemblies, stressed the wrong bearings. He stood abruptly. Then he yelled, "Shut down auxiliary grid 2. The training officer blinked. "What? That'll kill half the power in..." "Do it." The officer hesitated 1 second too long. The engine answered for him. A sharp metallic bang shot through the bay. Like a gunshot. Like a hammer hitting an anvil. The recruits screamed. Tyler stumbled backward into the hallway wall. Hannah covered her ears. Blake yelled, "What was that?" Henry didn't flinch. He stared at the shaft, jaw clenched. The bearing just cracked. He said, "One more hit like that, and you don't have an engine. You have a live bomb." Another bang, deeper, louder, closer to the heart of the ship. The overhead lights flickered so violently that one bulb exploded. The training officer finally snapped into motion. He grabbed the comm built into his sleeve and shouted, "Control! Emergency override! Shut down auxiliary grid 2 immediately!" A garbled voice replied, "Grid 2 is locked by remote protocol. Override it manually." "We can't. Someone remote accessed the system and..." Henry cut them off with a roar. "They're not remote. They're on this ship." That froze everyone. Even the air seemed to stop. Henry pointed at the sabotage node. "This device was planted today. Nobody off-ship got in here. Somebody on board is trying to force a failure." The recruits' faces twisted with fear. Blake whispered, "But why? Who would do that?" Henry didn't answer. He didn't have time. Instead, he marched toward the main power conduit and dropped to one knee. His fingers moved with a precision born from years of experience and years of loss. He stripped the panel, rewired 2 channels, bypassed the scrambled relay. The training officer saw what he was doing and gasped, "You're about to cut power to 12 systems. You'll trigger a level 3. It's this or we lose the drive," Henry barked. He jammed the last connector home. The ship went dark, a flicker of emergency lights. The engine slowed. Not fixed, not safe, but no longer screaming. The recruits exhaled in unison, though no one realized they had been holding their breath. Tyler stepped forward again, voice trembling with adrenaline. "Mr. Cole, did you stop it?" Henry stood up slowly, chest rising and falling as if he had just run a marathon. He looked at the engine with a strange mix of exhaustion and disappointment. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't stop it." Tyler blinked in confusion. "But the shaking?" "I bought us time," Henry said. "But whatever caused this, whatever they planted, this wasn't the real attack." He turned toward the doorway, toward the terrified recruits. This was a distraction. A chill swept through the room. Hannah whispered, "A distraction for what?" Henry didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He stared down at the sabotage device in his hand, its red light now blinking slowly, steadily, deliberately. He whispered one sentence that froze the blood of everyone who heard it. "They wanted us down here." For a long, tense second after Henry Cole whispered those words, "They wanted us down here," nobody in the hallway dared to breathe. The emergency lights flickered overhead, casting the engine bay in pulsing red glows that made every shadow look like it was moving. The recruits stood frozen in a line, just beyond the door, afraid to step forward, afraid to step back. Tyler March was the first to find his voice. "Sir, why would anyone want us down here? What's the point?" Henry didn't look at him. He stared at the sabotage device, its red light blinking deliberately, rhythmically, like a countdown. "Because," Henry said slowly, "someone needed us distracted. Someone needed the engine crew busy while they moved somewhere else on this ship." The training officer stiffened. "Moved where?" Henry raised his head. His expression hardened. The bridge. A wave of unease rippled through the recruits. Blake grabbed the door frame for support. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. Tyler felt his stomach drop. "The bridge?" he repeated. "To do what?" Henry didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward them, slow, measured steps echoing across the metal bay floor. His boots left small prints in the thin layer of dust, shaken loose by the engine's violent tremors. He stopped right in front of Tyler, inches away. "Son," Henry said quietly, "who has the access code to Auxiliary Grid 2? Tyler blinked. The engineering lieutenant, the XO, and the chief technician." "Then who else?" Henry pressed. Tyler hesitated. Then realization hit him like a slap. "The bridge, whoever's running system oversight today." Henry nodded. "And where would they need to be if they wanted to slip a disruptor into a relay without getting caught?" Tyler paled. "They'd have to time it with the systems refresh, when the bridge is doing their midday diagnostic sweep." The training officer's eyes widened with dawning horror. "Which is happening right now." Henry slipped the sabotage device into his pocket. "Exactly." The recruits erupted in whispers of panic. Blake cursed under his breath. Hannah looked visibly shaken. "What does this mean?" Blake demanded. "Why would someone sabotage the drive and try to access the bridge? Master level. Overrides most system locks." The training officer stared. You still have your old master key?" Henry didn't look at him. He didn't need to. He kept staring at the recruits, at Tyler in particular. "I wasn't supposed to still have this," Henry said. "But after what happened years ago, I kept it. Just in case." Hannah asked quietly. "In case of what?" Henry's eyes darkened. "In case someone ever tried something like this again." A heavy silence dropped over them. Tyler stepped forward. "What happened years ago?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. Henry's jaw tightened. "Later," he said. "Right now we have a problem." He pointed toward the corridor behind them. "The saboteur planted that device because they needed the diagnostics blind. They needed the engine vulnerable. They needed us to panic. And while we're stuck down here," Tyler whispered. Henry nodded grimly. "They're making their move upstairs." The training officer snapped into action. "Okay, we need to radio the bridge and warn them." He pressed the comm built into his sleeve. "Bridge, this is Bay 5, possible sabotage event. Lock down all unauthorized access immediately." Static. No reply. He tried again, louder. "Bridge, respond. This is Bay 5 requesting immediate." Static. Henry grabbed his wrist and pushed it down. "They've already cut bridge comms. And what do we do?" Blake nearly shouted. "We can't stop someone if we don't know who they are." Henry didn't hesitate. "We go up." The recruits stared at him as if he'd suggested walking into fire. "Up where?" Hannah asked. Henry's voice was clipped and cold. "The observation level. It's the only access point between the engineering deck and the bridge that someone could cross without passing check-in." The training officer shook his head. "But that level is sealed during diagnostics. No one can enter without clearance." Henry started walking down the hallway. "That's what the saboteur is counting on." Tyler rushed after him. "Sir, how can we get past a sealed level?" Henry glanced back. "I can open it." The recruits exchanged uneasy looks. Blake muttered, "We're really doing this? This feels like a movie." Hannah elbowed him sharply. "Shut up and walk." The entire group followed Henry through the lower engineering corridor in tense silence. Red emergency lights flashed overhead, reflecting against polished pipes and casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the walls. Halfway down, Tyler caught up beside Henry. "Sir," he whispered, Do you think whoever planted that device is the same person who messed with the diagnostics last week?" Henry didn't look at him. "Yes." Tyler swallowed hard. "And the same person who disabled the lockdown on the relay access?" Henry nodded once. and probably the same person who's heading for the bridge right now. Tyler felt fear swirl in his chest. But why? What's the point of sabotaging a Navy test run? This point of sabotaging a Navy test run. Henry stopped walking, and for the first time all day, the expression on his face wasn't frustration or authority or stern calm. It was grief. A stunned hush fell over the group. Tyler stared. Revenge? For what? Henry looked away, toward the steel walls, toward memories none of them could see. Back when I lost my crewmate, Henry said softly, the board blamed me. They said I should have flagged the issue earlier, that I should have known better. The recruits exchanged shocked glances. But you did warn them, Hannah whispered. Henry nodded. They didn't care. They needed someone to burn for the failure. Tyler asked gently, and the person behind this? Henry exhaled a long, slow breath. One of my old shipmates, someone who never forgave the Navy for clearing me and burying their mistakes. He held up the blinking disruptor. And now they're trying to make the Navy pay. A heavy silence followed. Then Henry turned around again and spoke in a low, determined voice. Stay close. Don't fall behind. He walked forward. And this time, the recruits kept up without hesitation. Because whatever waited above them was no longer just a threat to the ship. It was tied to Henry's past, to their future, to something bigger than any of them understood. And when the hallway opened into the stairwell leading toward the observation level, Henry didn't slow. He climbed, one step at a time. Eyes forward, ready for whatever came next. The metal stairwell spiraled upward like a steel throat, echoing every footstep as Henry Cole and the recruits climbed. Emergency lights pulsed along the walls, soft amber glows blinking in slow, rhythmic beats that made the shadows shift as if the ship itself were breathing. No one spoke. No one dared. The deeper they ascended, the louder the distant hum of the ship's core became, a steady vibration that felt almost alive, reminding them all that something dangerous was still simmering beneath their feet. Tyler kept glancing at Henry, trying to read the older man's expression. But Henry's face was carved from stone, hard lines, clenched jaw, eyes forward. He wasn't afraid. He was preparing. When they reached the first landing, Blake whispered, "Sir, what if the saboteur is armed?" Henry didn't slow. "Then stay behind me." Hannah clutched the railing. "Why would someone risk coming up here? Isn't the observation level locked?" Henry stopped at the next door, a heavy steel barrier with a glowing red panel. "That's exactly why," he said. "No one expects movement behind a locked door." The recruits exchanged nervous looks. Tyler stepped forward. "Sir, who do you think it is? Who would go this far?" Henry didn't answer. He placed his hand on the access panel. The screen pulsed, red, yellow, then green. With a loud click, the door slid open. A draft of cold air washed over them as the hallway beyond came into view. Narrow, dimly lit, lined with wall-length glass panels overlooking the engineering bay from above. The observation deck. Henry stepped inside first, the recruits right behind him. The walkway stretched ahead in eerie silence, the glass to the right showing a bird's-eye view of the massive engine room below, its emergency lights flickering like distress signals. Then Blake whispered, "Sir," Henry's eyes lifted. There, at the far end of the walkway, a lone figure stood with their back turned, hands moving rapidly over a wall-mounted terminal. A tall, slender silhouette. Dark jacket, hood down, focused, intentional. Not panicked, like someone who stumbled into the wrong place. Purposeful. Henry exhaled slowly. He knew that stance. He knew that way of working. Quick, precise, methodical. His stomach sank. "Stay back," he murmured to the recruits. But Tyler stepped forward instinctively. "Sir, who is that?" Henry didn't take his eyes off the figure. Someone else finally spoke from behind the terminal. Voice sharp, cold, familiar. "Took you longer to find me than I expected, Cole." The recruits stiffened. The figure straightened, hands leaving the console. Slowly, deliberately, they turned around. And the hallway tilted sideways for the recruits. But Henry saw only one thing. Gray hair at the temples, hard eyes, a uniform patch removed, leaving a faded outline. A face that looked carved from bitterness itself. "Marcus Hale," Henry whispered. Tyler blinked. You know him." Henry nodded once. Hale smiled, a thin, broken thing. "Half this ship owes its training to Henry Cole," he said, "including me." Hannah's eyes widened. "He was one of your recruits?" "No," Hale replied before Henry could speak. "Not a recruit." His smile shattered into something venomous. "I was his equal, at least before the Navy pretended otherwise." Henry's shoulders tightened. "Marcus, what are you doing? What you wouldn't?" Hale snapped. "What they should have done years ago." Tyler stepped forward. "What are you talking about?" Hale pointed accusingly at Henry. "This man watched my brother die." The recruits gasped. Henry closed his eyes for a heartbeat. Tyler whispered, "Sir, is that true?" Henry kept his voice calm, steady, painfully measured. "Marcus's brother was the sailor who didn't make it out the night that valve failed. I tried to pull him out myself." Hale barked a bitter laugh. "You tried. Yes, tried and failed. And the board blamed me for accusing you." The recruits stared between them, horrified. "I lost everything," Hale continued. "My commission, my career, my life. All because the Navy protected its golden engineer while letting my brother's death rot in the dark." Henry stepped forward cautiously. "Marcus, listen to me." "No," Hale raised a small black device. The recruits tensed. Tyler's breath caught. Hannah grabbed Blake's sleeve. Henry's eyes narrowed. "Marcus, what is that?" Hale lifted it between two fingers. A sleek, rectangular detonator. "This," he said softly, "is justice." Tyler shouted, "You're insane. You could get people killed." Hale's voice cracked, not with madness, but grief. "That's the idea. Not all of them, just enough to make them hear me." His eyes locked on Henry. "Just like they ignored you that night, until it was too late." Henry took another step. "Marcus, I didn't want any of this. I begged the board to review the failure. They silenced both of us." "Lies," Hale roared, voice echoing down the corridor. "You walked away with honors." "I walked away with nothing." He pressed the detonator's trigger halfway. A half click that made every recruit jump back. Henry's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Marcus, you don't want to push that. You don't know what I want," Hale snapped. Henry's expression shifted, just slightly. "Yes," he said, "I do." The deck suddenly groaned beneath them, a shudder running through the ship's frame. Hale smiled bitterly. "That's the main drive straining," he said. "The one you always swore you could hear. The one I rigged to fail so you'd come running." Henry's jaw tightened. "You sabotaged it? Just to lure me here?" Hale nodded. "To make you watch the Navy fall the way my brother fell." Henry exhaled. "Marcus, look at me." Hale hesitated. "Just long enough." Henry's voice softened. "Your brother was my friend." Hale's expression flickered. Pain, anger, betrayal, mixing like poison. You had 40 years to say that. Henry took another step. Slow. Measured. My guilt didn't start today, he said, but revenge won't bring him back. Hale's hand tightened on the detonator. Tyler shouted, "Sir, don't!" Henry ignored him. He kept walking. Hale stepped back instinctively. "Stop," he warned. Henry didn't. "Stop!" Hale screamed. Henry kept coming. Slow, calm, unafraid. Hale's lips trembled. "Do not make me press this." Henry reached out his hand. "Give it to me." Hale's voice broke, desperate. "He was my brother, and I miss him too," Henry said, voice shaking for the first time all day. Hale froze. The recruits watched in stunned silence. For one impossible moment, Hale's hand lowered, but then, a violent alarm screamed through the deck. Red lights exploded across the corridor. A metallic voice boomed. "Bridge override. Unauthorized access detected." Hale's face drained of color. Henry's heart stopped. Tyler whispered, terrified, What does that mean?" Henry turned toward them slowly. "It means someone else is on the bridge." Every recruit went still. Blake gasped. There's more than one saboteur?" Henry stared at Hale. Hale stared back. And for once, Hale didn't smile, because even he didn't know the answer. The alarm kept blaring, each pulse pounding against the observation deck windows like a fist demanding entry. Red light washed across every surface, turning metal rails and glass panels into jagged streaks of warning. "Bridge override. Unauthorized access detected." The words felt unreal. Hannah clutched the railing. "Sir, someone else is doing this." Blake's voice cracked. "There's 2 saboteurs." Marcus Hale, still gripping the detonator, stared around in stunned confusion. That wasn't me," he stammered. "I didn't trigger a bridge override." Henry Cole stepped closer, not with fear, but with a slow, powerful calm that made the recruits fall silent. "It's not about you anymore, Marcus," Henry said. "Someone used your grief. Someone used your anger. You weren't their plan." Marcus blinked, stunned. "What? But I planted the disruptor." "No," Henry said sharply. "You didn't plant the first device. You planted the decoy." Tyler inhaled sharply. "Decoy?" Henry nodded. The real sabotage was happening somewhere else, while the engine bay was in chaos. Another alarm burst overhead. Bridge firewall disabled. Remote access engaged. Hale stepped backward, shaking his head. "No, no, no. Someone is hijacking the ship's controls." "That's impossible. The only person who could even try that is—" He stopped. His eyes slowly widened, and Henry saw it instantly. "Who?" Henry demanded. Marcus swallowed hard. His voice came out barely audible. "Chief Rower." Even the ship seemed to fall silent for a heartbeat. Tyler's jaw dropped. "The chief technician? But he left hours ago." "No," Henry whispered. "He didn't." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the sabotage device. "When I picked this up, the signal was already dying. That means the real sync node is close to the bridge, within remote access range." Hannah covered her mouth. "So Chief Rower's been sabotaging the ship for months?" Marcus trembled, the detonator shaking in his grip. He whispered, "What have I done?" Before Henry could answer, the corridor lights slammed to full brightness. White, blinding, scorching. A new voice echoed through the hallway. A man's voice. Cold. Smooth. Too calm. "Step away from him, Cole." The recruits spun around. A figure emerged from the far doorway. Bald head. Gray beard. Crisp technician's uniform. Chief Rower. He walked toward them with slow, confident steps, as if this were the most ordinary afternoon of his life. Henry exhaled sharply. "You planned this whole thing?" Rower smirked. "Of course I did. The Navy has ignored every warning I've given them for years. They cut corners. They lie about failures. They bury accidents. Someone needed to make them feel the consequences." Tyler clenched his fists. "By putting us in danger." Rower shrugged. "Collateral damage." Marcus stared at him in horror. "You used me. You said this was for my brother." Rower didn't even look at him. "Your brother was incompetent. He made a mistake and died for it." Marcus flinched like he'd been shot. Henry's jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. "Say that again," Henry growled. Rower smiled wider. "He died because he wasn't worth saving." Henry moved. It wasn't a run. It wasn't a lunge. It was a quiet, terrifying step, the kind a man makes when he's already accepted the cost. But Rower was ready. He lifted a small cylindrical remote and tapped its center. Immediately, the bridge doors sealed. The ship groaned. The lights flickered, and the engines whined. "Oh no!" Tyler gasped. What did he do? Rower's eyes glittered with triumph. "I activated the overload." Henry's face twisted. "You'll blow the entire ship." "Exactly," Rower said calmly. "Then the Navy will finally listen." Henry grabbed the nearest wall terminal and ripped off its protective plate. "Tyler," he barked. "On me." Tyler sprinted to his side. Hannah and Blake moved without hesitation. They worked in chaotic unison. Henry rerouting power, Tyler isolating the overload signal, Blake pulling schematics from memory, Hannah reading voltage fluctuations. Marcus, still on his knees, stared blankly at the floor. Rower took a step toward the bridge access. Henry shouted, "Tyler, stop him." Tyler didn't question. He leaped. He slammed into Rower, knocking the remote from his hands. It skidded across the floor with a metallic scream. Rower shoved Tyler off with surprising strength. They struggled violently, elbows, fists, grappling. Henry kept working, wires sparking under his hands. "Blake, cut the secondary output." "On it." "Read me the temperature." "It's climbing past safe levels, 50 seconds until meltdown." Tyler punched Rower hard across the jaw. Rower slammed Tyler into the wall. Henry ripped out another wire. "Marcus," Henry shouted, "if you want redemption, move." Marcus blinked. His breath hitched. He looked at Rower, the man who had manipulated him, used his grief, stolen years of his life. And something inside Marcus Hale snapped back into place. He surged to his feet and grabbed Rower from behind, locking his arms around him. "You lied to me," Marcus screamed. Rower thrashed wildly. Henry saw his chance. He jammed two wires together. The lights exploded in a blaze of white. The corridor tremored, and the ship's engine roared. Then suddenly, everything went silent. Silent. Dead silent. The emergency lights stabilized. The floor stopped shaking. Hannah exhaled a breath that became a sob. Blake dropped to the ground, shaking. Tyler staggered to his feet. ... Marcus released Rower, who collapsed unconscious. Henry finally rose, sweat streaking his temples and heat burns. Tyler whispered, "Sir, did we stop it?" Henry nodded slowly. "You stopped it. Not me. You. Not me." The recruits stared at him, not as an old engineer, not as a man haunted by the past, but as a man ... as if a less light flickered. Not as a man haunted by the past, but as someone who had just saved them all. "Sir, what happens now?" Henry looked at Marcus, broken, trembling, crying silently. Then at Rower, the architect of disaster. Then at the recruits, young, scared, but unbroken. Now, Henry said softly, we go to the bridge and take our ship back. Tyler stepped beside him. So this is over. Henry placed a hand on his shoulder. No, he said quietly. This is the beginning. If you liked this story, make sure to subscribe for more emotional, cinematic tales of courage, justice, and the human spirit. Let us know in the comments what part hit you the hardest, and what story you want to hear next.